The first thing Everett Vale noticed was the smell of oil and rust. The second was the little girl standing barefoot near the doorway, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit while trying to hide behind her father's leg. And the third thing he noticed was the garage itself, a crooked old building sitting at the edge of a forgotten road, with peeling blue paint, broken windows patched with cardboard, and a roof that looked one hard storm away from collapsing forever. Everett, one of the wealthiest automobile collectors in the country, stared at the place with disgust before shaking his head slowly. He laughed under his breath and called it a dump. But less than 20 minutes later, after a rusty metal door rolled open and sunlight touched what had been hidden inside for years, the billionaire forgot how to breathe. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you still believe kindness can change lives and second chances still exist in this world. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind the deepest struggles. The small town of Belridge had long been forgotten by people with power. Once known for its hard-working factory workers and proud mechanics, it had slowly faded into silence after industries moved away. Empty storefronts lined the streets like ghosts of better days. Most people who stayed behind learned how to survive with less. Some fixed broken appliances. Others sold vegetables from tiny gardens. And some, like Rowan Mercer, simply worked every day until exhaustion became normal. Rowan had been raising his 8-year-old daughter, Ivy, alone ever since his wife passed away from an illness 3 years earlier. The hospital bills had swallowed everything they owned. Their house was gone. Their savings vanished. Even the wedding ring he once promised never to remove had disappeared into a pawn shop on a freezing winter evening just so he could buy medicine and groceries. All he had left now was the old garage his father built decades ago and the little girl who still waited every night by the window for him to come home safely. Every morning before sunrise, Rowan opened the garage doors and worked on whatever cars people in Belridge could afford to repair. Old pickup trucks, worn sedans, broken farm vehicles, nothing glamorous ever rolled into his shop. His hands were permanently stained black with grease, and his back carried the ache of years spent bending over engines. But no matter how hard life became, he always made time to braid Ivy's hair before school and tuck handwritten notes into her lunchbox because he never wanted her to feel the emptiness poverty had carved into their lives. What nobody knew was that Rowan carried another secret inside that garage. Hidden beneath old tarps, dusty shelves, and piles of forgotten machinery was a masterpiece that had consumed years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and sleepless nights. A car so rare and beautiful that even the richest collectors in the world would have fought wars to own it. But Rowan never built it for money. He built it because it was the last dream his late wife had believed in before she died. The day Everett Vale arrived in Belridge, news spread quickly. His convoy of black luxury SUVs looked completely out of place on the cracked roads of the small town. People whispered from sidewalks and diner windows as the billionaire stepped out wearing an expensive tailored coat and polished shoes that had probably cost more than most residents earned in a month. Everett was famous across the country for buying rare vintage cars and displaying them inside a private museum visited by celebrities and politicians. He had everything wealth could buy, yet he was known for being cold, arrogant, and impossible to impress. He had come to Belridge chasing rumors. Months earlier, Everett had heard whispers from an old racing engineer about a hidden custom restoration project built by an unknown mechanic somewhere in the countryside. According to the rumor, the car contained engineering details thought impossible to recreate by modern standards. Everett dismissed it at first, but curiosity eventually pulled him there. When he reached Rowan's garage, disappointment hit him immediately. The building looked abandoned. Rainwater stains covered the walls. Rust crawled across the metal doors. Scrap parts littered the yard like forgotten bones. Everett barely hid his irritation as he stepped around puddles of oil. To him, greatness belonged in spotless glass showrooms and million-dollar facilities, not inside a collapsing shack run by a tired single father. Rowan emerged from beneath the hood of an old truck, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. His face carried exhaustion, but his eyes remained calm and steady. Ivy peeked from behind a stack of tires, studying the strangers carefully. Everett looked around with visible disgust before muttering that the place was nothing more than a dump. One of his assistants laughed quietly. Another covered his nose dramatically. For a moment, Rowan said nothing. Years of hardship had taught him that pride did not pay bills. But Ivy heard the insult. Her little face tightened as she lowered her eyes toward the floor. And something about that silent heartbreak changed the air inside the garage. Rowan slowly folded the rag in his hands and looked directly at Everett. Then, without anger or bitterness, he walked toward the back corner of the garage where a massive dusty tarp covered something enormous. The room suddenly felt smaller. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling as Rowan gripped the tarp with both hands. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash. Ivy stood frozen near the doorway, her small fingers tightening around her stuffed rabbit. Then Rowan pulled the tarp away. Silence crashed into the room. Underneath sat one of the most breathtaking machines Everett Vale had ever seen in his life. It was a fully restored 1966 Ford GT40, painted in deep midnight blue with silver racing stripes flowing across the body like lightning. Every curve gleamed under the sunlight. Every detail looked impossibly precise. But it wasn't just beautiful. It was alive. The craftsmanship was beyond anything Everett had seen, even in elite European collections worth hundreds of millions. Everett stepped closer slowly, unable to speak. The engine had been rebuilt by hand. The interior stitched with custom leatherwork detailed so perfectly it resembled art. Hidden beneath the hood were modifications and innovations so advanced they made modern luxury vehicles seem ordinary. Rowan had somehow blended classic engineering with subtle modern brilliance without destroying the soul of the original car. Everett's expression changed completely. The billionaire who moments earlier mocked the garage now stared at Rowan with disbelief. But the most shocking detail was hidden inside the glove compartment. Rowan opened it carefully and pulled out an old photograph. In the picture stood a smiling woman beside the unfinished shell of the car years earlier. Her hands were covered in paint, her face glowing with hope despite the oxygen tube beneath her nose. Ivy, much younger then, sat on the hood laughing. Rowan explained quietly that his wife, Celeste, had dreamed of restoring the car together. She believed one day it would change their lives. Even after doctors told them she was dying, she spent nights sketching designs and helping Rowan rebuild parts piece by piece. After she passed away, Rowan continued the project alone because finishing it became the only promise he had left to keep. Everett listened in silence. For the first time in many years, something uncomfortable stirred inside him. Because while Rowan had lost nearly everything and still managed to build beauty from pain, Everett had spent decades drowning in wealth while feeling absolutely nothing. That night, Everett could not sleep. The image of Ivy hiding behind her father replayed in his mind repeatedly. So did the photograph of Celeste smiling beside the unfinished car. Everett remembered his own childhood suddenly, memories he had buried beneath success and ambition. He too had once been poor. His father had owned a tiny repair shop before losing everything. But unlike Rowan, Everett had escaped poverty by becoming ruthless. Somewhere along the journey, compassion disappeared from him completely. The next morning, Everett returned to the garage alone. The early sunlight painted the town gold. Rowan was already working beneath another truck while Ivy sat nearby drawing pictures with broken crayons. This time Everett noticed things he ignored before. The worn stitching on Rowan's jacket. The careful way Ivy preserved every tiny crayon because replacing them was difficult. The exhaustion hidden beneath Rowan's calm expression. Everett walked slowly toward the GT40 again. Then he offered Rowan $10 million for the car. Any other person might have accepted instantly. $10 million could buy houses, security, freedom, and comfort beyond imagination. But Rowan surprised him. He refused. Everett stared at him in disbelief. Rowan explained that the car was not just metal and paint. It carried memories of Celeste. Every bolt reminded him of nights spent fighting despair together. Every scratch on his hands came from trying to honor her dream. Selling it felt like selling the final piece of his family. For the first time in years, Everett respected someone more than he admired their possessions. Days passed, and Everett remained in Belridge longer than expected. He began helping Rowan inside the garage, at first awkwardly, then sincerely. He played chess with Ivy using missing pieces replaced by bottle caps. He ate simple dinners at their tiny kitchen table. Slowly, the walls around his heart began to crack. One afternoon, Everett discovered unpaid medical notices hidden beneath Rowan's desk. Ivy had a heart condition requiring surgery Rowan could never afford. The realization hit Everett harder than any business loss he had ever experienced. That evening, while Ivy slept on the couch holding her stuffed rabbit, Everett sat alone outside the garage watching the sunset burn across the horizon. Belridge was quiet except for distant crickets and the sound of wind moving through old trees. For the first time in decades, he cried. Not because of money. Not because of regret. But because he finally understood how empty his life had become. The next morning, Everett made a decision that shocked everyone. Instead of buying the GT40, he secretly funded Ivy's surgery, paid off Rowan's debts, and arranged for the garage to be fully restored into a professional restoration workshop while keeping Rowan as the owner. He also created a scholarship in Celeste's name for struggling mechanics and engineers from small towns like Belridge. When Rowan discovered what Everett had done, he stood speechless inside the renovated garage weeks later. The old leaking roof had been repaired. New tools lined the walls. Sunlight poured through clean windows. Yet the place still felt like home. Everett handed Rowan the keys quietly and told him some things were too valuable to buy. Rowan looked toward Ivy, who ran laughing across the polished floor for the first time without fear in her eyes. In that moment, the garage no longer felt like a place of survival. It felt like hope. Months later, Belridge slowly came back to life. Customers traveled from across the country to visit Rowan's workshop after hearing about his extraordinary craftsmanship. Young mechanics arrived hoping to learn from him. Local businesses reopened. The forgotten town breathed again. And parked proudly in the center of the garage remained the midnight blue GT40, not hidden anymore, but shining like proof that dreams built with love can survive even the darkest storms. Everett continued visiting often, though now he arrived without convoys or expensive suits. Ivy called him Uncle Everett. Sometimes they sat together outside the garage eating ice cream while Rowan worked nearby beneath warm afternoon sunlight. The billionaire who once mocked the garage as a dump eventually admitted it became the place that saved his soul. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with someone who still believes kindness matters. Your support helps stories like these reach people who may need hope today more than ever. And before this story ends, comment, hidden treasures still exist, if you believe people should never be judged by appearances alone. On the final evening of summer, Rowan stood outside the garage watching Ivy ride her bicycle down the street while laughter echoed through Belridge. The sunset painted the repaired garage doors gold, and for a brief moment, he imagined Celeste standing beside him again, smiling proudly at the life they somehow rebuilt from grief and rust. Some people spend their entire lives searching for treasure in banks, mansions, and luxury cars. But the greatest treasures are often hidden inside ordinary people who refuse to give up after life breaks them apart. And sometimes, behind the rustiest doors, the world hides something beautiful enough to change even the coldest heart forever.